Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome back to another session with me. I'm going to talk about Ukraine. Now, we know that the world is afire with Pakistan in absolute trouble. Imran Khan has been arrested and there's a lot of mayhem, murder, arson, you name it, is going on. But I will talk about Ukraine, which is also important. Now, one thing, let's be very clear, that the Ukraine war is the most important war of the 21st century. And I will say one line here, and that is the West, that is the Americans, the British and the EU, must not be allowed to win in Ukraine. It's a clear-cut demarcation, because if they win in Ukraine and Russia is defeated, the entire world will be enslaved by the European powers and the Americans. Now, if you look at the history for the last 200 years, from the 18th century onwards, the West has colonized the whole world, and America also became part of the system. Africa, India, China. For 200 years and even more, they were the lackeys, the slaves of the Western powers. And what did the Western powers do? They exploited them. No less a man than Dr. Shashi Tharoor in his books have brought out that the British denuded India of $3 trillion to fill the coffers in England. They destroyed the Indian culture, the Indian handicrafts, and a once thriving society and economy was reduced to poverty and penury. The same thing they did in Africa. They occupied whole areas, swaths of land, and used it for their gloriousness, for their pleasure. Into China, they forced 2 opium wars in China. For what? Forcing China to buy opium from the British, and they lost, of course, the Chinese lost both the wars. And this state of affairs continued till 1945. It would not have ended at all. But something happened. That's a God sent, I will say. Adolf Hitler came on the scene, and he shook the roots of the imperialists. The British and the French did win a victory with the help of the Americans and most of the Russians, but in the bargain, they were so emaciated that they lost their empires. The French tried to retain their empire right up to 1960 when they fought the war in Algeria. They wanted to make Algeria a French colony forever. They tried to retake and keep Indochina as a colony till they were defeated by General Giap in the famous battle in 1954, the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. Gentlemen, the West has exploited the entire world, and after 45, the British were so emaciated that they couldn't hold on to the empire and they went away. But they have lurking feelings, and they were not at all happy to leave India, and even now they would try any stratagem, anything to come back and control India. The only fly in the ointment is China, which they have not been able to control at all now. And the another fly in the ointment is Russia. Russia was a superpower under communism, but over a period of time, the Russian Empire tanked. Communism, which was supposed to be a global phenomena, actually ended in breaking up the Tsarist Empire, and thanks to that, the stratagems of the Americans and the British. So now the Americans have a plan. Yes, they do. They would like the war in Ukraine to continue till Russia is emaciated, destroyed, and then I feel they have a plan. If I've gone through the videos by John Mishmar, and he has brought out that the American plan is now clear. They want to get rid of Putin and if possible break Russia into 3 or 4 countries So Russia is no longer a threat. That's number one. Then they will deal with India and ensure that India doesn't rise up, because the British are very unhappy, and the French are also looking to the past glory. That's past glory is glory. There's no glory now in the French. And the only country they will then have to deal with is China. The Ukraine war, gentlemen, is thus important, very important, because under no circumstances should the West be allowed to win in Ukraine. If they win, it will be back to the status quo, where the West will dominate. Even now, they are trying their level best to dominate over India with all sorts of tariff rates and this thing and that, and trying to put pressure on India and trying to build Pakistan as a counterweight to India. What is Pakistan? Nothing, except something propped up by the United States since 1954. China came in much later. But since 1954, the Americans have been propping China against India, basically. When they gave them weapons, they knew they were not going to be used against Russia or anything, and they were going to be used against India, and they were used against India. It's another matter that the Pakis got defeated, rooted. They lost half the territory in Bangladesh, which Richard Nixon tried his best to stop. So, gentlemen, the point I am coming to again is this, that if the West wins in Ukraine, it will be back to status quo, and in that case, I think it's imperative on most countries in the world, and at least in Asia and Africa, to ensure that the Russians do not lose, and it's incumbent on India for its own health to ensure that the Russians are not defeated and they win in Ukraine. Biden is not going to give up so easily, and perhaps he's not aware that he's signing the death warrant of America. This war is going to go on and on as per the American plan, but it's not going to sap Russia. It will sap Russia, but the situation will come when there will be a nuclear explosion. There has to be, and I can mark my words, there's going to be a nuclear explosion, if not today, tomorrow. And Ukraine will next be a devastated land for the next 50 years. And now the Americans have a plan, in case the Russians engineer such a thing, to try and attack Russia with nuclear weapons. And they are positioning their troops in now, even in Finland and everywhere. But positioning troops has no relevance. It is the gumption, the guts to fight, which is more important. And in a conventional war, NATO, which has not fought a war for the last 78 years, is going to be a big zero in the plains of Russia and Europe. So I hope, gentlemen, wisdom dawns on the American, British and the EU leadership, and the policy should be to have a detente and share the sunlight, because the West is now facing twilight. You can't help it. It's going to happen. England, as you know, is in dire straits. The French have an agitation every day, either on pension reforms or anything else, and they have sizable Muslim majorities which do not accept American, French or British laws and society. Sweden, look at these small countries, and what's happening is the demographic bomb. When I say demographic bomb, the European woman's birth rate sometimes hovers on 1.1 when the requirement is 2.1, and what is happening? The population is going down. It's the aging population, and an aging population will tell us, as per Malthus theory, is not the way forward. Gentlemen, Europe is beset by problems, and that is why they are very keen to see they defeat Russia in Ukraine. And I repeat again, the world has to ensure, the free world, that is the Africa and Asia, that the West does not win in Ukraine. I have a feeling the West is not going to win in Ukraine, because this war is going to lead to Armageddon, the third world war, the battle between good and evil, and that will be the end of the Western civilization. And it is something which is inevitable, and the Americans, drunk with arrogance of power, help them. God save the king, they used to say. I will say, God save America. Let it have reason. Give a proper leadership to the world. Don't go around creating wars. 1945 to 2023, 85 to 90% of the wars have been instigated by the Americans, and in all of them they lost. I would like to know one war after 1945 they won. They're going to win again in Ukraine. Well, gentlemen, these are off-the-cuff remarks which I have made because I wanted to bring this point to the knowledge of people who can understand that there are great states involved in Ukraine, and one sincerely hopes that Russia does not lose in Ukraine. Otherwise, there will be nuclear war, and of course the West will cease to exist. I close now, gentlemen, and wish you all the best. Jai Hind, glory to India. Subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and come back for more. God bless. Goodbye.